On this edition of The Fifth Estate, the battle over climate change.
We are in a race against time.
Fires, floods, heat domes. Our planet is getting hotter with tragic results.
The whole hillside's gone.
Over 600 people died, and one of them was my sister.
But what and who will stop it?
This is COP28, and we can still not agree to equitably phase out fossil fuels. What are we doing?
In order to address climate change, we need to be talking about the cause of climate change.
It is so decided.
Leaders say they're making progress, but are they?
We've been trying to warn you guys for so many decades. Now we're heading towards a catastrophe.
Those fed up with climate politics won't wait.
When all else fails, sue.
And the face-off between Alberta's Premier and the Federal Minister of Environment.
I wish you would put Stephen Guilbeault in your crosshairs.
The Premier of Alberta turned this into a culture war.
He wants to put someone in jail? I guess it'll be me.
The brawl over our heating planet. I'm Susan Ormiston, and this is The Fifth Estate.
Athens is sweltering, a blistering U.S. Southwest.
Global temperature records have been breaking all summer.
The air is unbreathable, the heat is unbearable.
More than hot enough to cause serious harm to human health. Temperatures are now set to climb even higher.
Now, July is on track to be the hottest month in recorded history.
The hottest month became the hottest year, 2023. Just as the world's largest climate conference opened in Dubai, delegates desperate for a deal to turn down the heat. Prime ministers and presidents, top diplomats, and a sprinkling of kings kicked off what was supposed to be one of the most consequential climate meetings in nearly a decade, COP28. Delegates, observers, and negotiators from more than 190 countries, including over 700 from Canada.
Opening ceremony is full. At this point, only party heads or deputy party heads.
Clamoring to get into the opening ceremony, to hear what they already knew. The world was heating up perilously.
How dangerous are we actually prepared to make our world? In 2050, our grandchildren won't be asking what we said. They will be living with the consequences of what we did or didn't do. Activists at this COP were losing patience. If not this year, they asked, then when would global politicians finally tackle the oil and gas industry head on? Demanding countries phase out fossil fuels. In plain speech, cut production of oil and gas.
Put phase out of fossil fuels in the text because you owe it to us, especially to the nations from the global south.
Danielle Smith from Colombia and Texan Alexia Leclerc came to COP for one reason: change.
This is COP28. 28 COPs, and we can still not agree to equitably phase out fossil fuels. What are we doing?
It seems sometimes like it is a show. What is this whole reunion of people about if we're gonna keep doing the same, if we're gonna give options to not do anything?
With the world coming to Dubai, the United Arab Emirates, which got rich off oil and gas, wanted to prove they could be green too. And the success or failure of COP28 rested with this man, Sultan Al Jaber, chosen by the host country as president for this COP. But Al Jaber's real job is running the UAE's national oil and gas company, ADNOC.
We must ensure the inclusion of the role of fossil fuels.
COP28 being hosted by a petro-state was a perfect opportunity to talk about the cause of the climate crisis, and that's fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas.
Harjit Singh has been campaigning for solutions to climate change for 2 decades. Based in Delhi, He's worked with international NGOs, this time with Climate Action Network. Dubai was his 15th COP.
Let me remind you that the fossil fuel industry made profits of $4 trillion last year. The pressure had been building to double down on the fossil fuel industry, and we challenged him to deliver. More fossil fuels means more loss and damage, more disasters, more people losing their homes.
We collectively have the power to do something unprecedented. In fact, we have no choice.
The pressure was on Al Jaber to deliver on an historic decision.
They also kept saying that this is going to be a different COP because we are going to be delivering a landmark deal. So for them, it was all about image boosting and creating a legacy.
The very first COP in Berlin in 1995 began the work of tackling climate change. In Kyoto in 1997, they committed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
The United States has reached a truly historic agreement with other nations of the world to take unprecedented steps.
Followed by year after year of promises as extreme floods and droughts outpaced the efforts to contain them. But at all the previous climate conferences, there was one glaring omission, says Canadian Catherine Abreu.
I think it's really surprising to learn that the convention that brings all of the world's countries together to talk about the climate crisis doesn't actually discuss the cause of the climate crisis directly.
Abreu is a climate policy activist, and she's been a fixture at the UN conferences for 8 years. Her first was Paris in 2015.
L'accord de Paris pour le climat est accepté.
Where the world signed on to a climate treaty to try to limit global heating to 1.5 degrees Celsius from pre-industrial levels.
I showed up to this COP expecting to have a conversation with my peers about how we were going to be fighting the fight against fossil fuels worldwide. And instead I found a space that was completely void of any conversations about coal, oil, and gas. I think that really goes to show the extent to which these spaces were actively engineered to avoid addressing the root cause of the climate crisis.
In the 28 years of climate conferences, fossil fuel emissions globally have just kept rising.
Although Canadians might be skeptical, 1995 was the warmest year on record.
1998 may offer a glimpse into the future, a time when scorching heat and severe weather will be the norm.
The hottest year of all was 2005. The hottest year of all in the U.S. was 2006.
2010 was the warmest year on record.
Back in Dubai, Canada's delegation was headed by the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, Stephen Guilbeault.
Should I be looking at one of the... Bonjour tout le monde, good morning. Very happy to be here.
As a former environmental activist, Guilbeault had been to 22 COPs. This time, he was tapped by Sultan Al Jaber to help shepherd part of the negotiations.
I think we have a real chance, I'm not saying it's a done deal, but I think we have a real chance of landing something that would be historic here in Dubai.
Please give us a good text. Are you going to compromise at all on fossil fuels? On the wording?
But that power struggle with oil and gas interests would dominate this COP just as it had for years. A record number of fossil fuel lobbyists and delegates, over 2,000, were attending this COP.
OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Producers, had a booth at COP28 for the first time at a set of UN climate talks, and we saw their influence pretty starkly.
A leaked letter from OPEC to its member nations urged them to reject a draft decision with options on fossil fuels phase-out. Warning, that would set in motion irreversible consequences. The message was clear. Keep the talk on curbing emissions, not cutting production. a significant distinction, meaning freedom to expand oil and gas, just deal with the polluting emissions.
Basically, they're saying, we'll just take care of the emissions and we don't have to worry about what's actually causing those emissions.
With 48 hours left to go, COP's architects began to sweat.
We are in a race against time.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres tried to push negotiators to reach consensus to help save the climate and the credibility of the whole conference. Saudi Arabia and others were dead set against any attempts to phase out fossil fuels.
Mr. President, is the deal more ambitious now?
Sultan Al Jaber delivered a final appeal.
Failure or lack of progress or watering down my ambition is not an option.
At dawn, with COP in overtime, national delegations were summoned.
Will you be asking for changes, sir?
Saudi's energy ministers swept by into the plenary hall, brushing questions aside. COP28 was about to conclude. Sultan Al Jaber raised the gavel.
Hearing no objection, it is so decided.
He had his deal, and it got a standing ovation.
Future generations may not know your names, but they will owe every single one of you a debt of gratitude. I thank you for this historic achievement.
It took 28 years to even mention the cause, fossil fuels. But the world had only agreed to transition away from fossil fuels, not phase them out. The Arab Group delegation called it successful, and the U.S. named it a win.
I am in awe of the spirit of cooperation that has brought everybody together.
But the agreement failed to direct nations to curb production, provoking some deep disappointment.
Could we just get a comment?
What we saw today was extremely heartbreaking. What we needed was to address the root cause of the climate crisis, which was a phase out of fossil fuel, and we didn't get that.
My framing is it is historic yet flawed. So many loopholes that we have got in this decision, we ultimately land up at the lowest common denominator, which is not strong enough to avert the crisis.
No one, I think, who participated in COP28 is saying that it has provided the solution to the climate crisis. Major fossil fuel producers, including Canada, not just Saudi Arabia, are going to read what they want to read into some of these sentences.
A month later, Catherine Abreu is back in Ottawa, sifting through what COP28 actually accomplished. It didn't go far enough, she says, but finally naming fossil fuels will send an important signal.
The major message that's coming out of COP28 is that the thing we have to do in this decade between now and 2030 is to focus on eliminating the production and consumption of fossil fuels.
When we come back, that battle heating up in Canada. Alberta's Premier takes on Ottawa's Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
If we get to 2035 and we aren't able to meet his unrealistic targets and he wants to put someone in jail, I guess it'll be me.
On a crisp winter day in Alberta, an American import landed in the oil patch.
This is wild. Thank you.
Tucker Carlson preaching his anti-establishment sermon to Canada.
There is zero evidence that the Trudeau government loves you, and there's overwhelming evidence that they hate you and your families.
Spreading his beliefs to a ready audience.
And when they started calling people who question climate change, just cracks me up. In a country shaped by glaciers, has there been climate change before? I'm just wondering.
He got the same reception in Calgary. The former Fox News host, fired last year, is touring friendly places. A pit stop here before jetting off to see Vladimir Putin.
Premier Danielle Smith.
But he wasn't the only draw. Premier Danielle Smith wanted to share his stage, to punch her message that oil and gas in Alberta is booming and no one's going to tell her to cap it.
So I think we should just double down and decide we're going to double our oil and gas production.
But the Premier has a problem, which in her mind is getting in her way.
I wish you would put Stephen Guilbeault in your crosshairs. He happens to be our environment minister federally. He's best known for scaling the CN Tower in opposition of fossil fuels when he was working as an environmental advocate. So I'm trying to get him fired, and I would love your help on that.
Danielle Smith is locked in a nasty brawl with Stephen Guilbeault over Ottawa's climate agenda. Everything from capping carbon emissions to curbing natural gas. Their fight has reached a boiling point. They both agreed to talk to the Fifth Estate, and they didn't hold back.
I think she feels that she has to pretend she cares about this issue of climate change. It's not about facts. It's all about trying to score cheap political points.
He's going too far. He's asking us to do things that are unachievable, and I live in the real world.
Alberta is key to Guilbeault's mission. With oil and gas, it contributes a third of the greenhouse gas emissions in Canada. In Smith's camp, some fiercely independent Albertans who like nothing more than taking on the feds.
Your generation's being robbed by Trudeau and the clowns. You got a guy that climbs buildings.
So I guess you think he should resign?
Oh, I think he should resign, absolutely. Absolutely. The whole Liberal government should resign. These guys are dishonest and they're thieves.
When we go through history, we've gone through ice ages and hot times and everything else. So to me, that's climate change, and that's normal every day.
When scientists then say that this last year was the warmest year on record, you don't believe that?
I don't know. I don't know that it was. I would have to check that. And, you know, I don't think you can believe anything that anyone says these days.
Welcome to another miracle on the prairies.
Smith won Alberta's election last May with a promise.
It is time to put partisanship, division, and personal and political attacks in the rearview mirror.
But seemingly not for Trudeau's government.
Justin Trudeau is planning on bringing forward new restrictions on electricity generation from natural gas. I cannot, under any circumstances, allow these contemplated federal policies to be inflicted upon Albertans. I simply can't, and I won't.
It was a warning signal to Guilbeault, who joined cabinet in 2019 and 2 years ago was put in charge of Ottawa's climate plans with a mandate to charge ahead. It was a long climb to those halls of power. Over 20 years ago, he was hanging off the CN Tower, calling Canada and the US climate killers.
Greenpeace is climbing the world's tallest building today to tell the world not to be fooled by the Liberal government. You shouldn't fear change. You shouldn't fear the Kyoto Protocol.
2 decades back, he helped colleagues with a stunt to put solar panels on Alberta's former Premier Ralph Klein's roof.
I was told by other premiers that he was an ideologue and he wouldn't meet me partway, and they were right.
She is attacking many of your climate change initiatives. It's a barrier, isn't it?
I think that the Premier of Alberta and the leader of the Conservative Party have decided to make out of the issue of climate change a wedge issue with voters and really turn this into a culture war. I find this frankly immoral and unconscionable, but it is what they've decided to do.
The Liberal government's record on climate change has its own critics. In 2018, it bought a pipeline. And in 2022, Guilbeault himself approved an oil megaproject off the coast of Newfoundland.
Was that a difficult decision for me? Absolutely.
But last year, he put that behind him.
This is an exciting day. Today, Canada is taking a giant step forward in our fight against climate change.
Guilbeault barreled on with the government's plan to decarbonize electrical grids across Canada. Ottawa set a target for net zero electricity by 2035, going to the heart of Alberta's dependence on natural gas. Premier Smith fired back. Albertans, she said, would freeze in the dark.
I heard you say that you've asked his cabinet colleagues to rein him in.
Yes.
Do you sense that there's a division in the cabinet about Steven Guilbeault?
I hope there is. If we get to 2035 and we aren't able to meet his unrealistic targets and he wants to put someone in jail, I guess it'll be me.
Would you?
Well, that's simply not true. I mean, it's more hyperbole and lies, unfortunately, in many instances, that we hear Danielle Smith and Pierre Poilievre spew away every day of the week.
The Premier doubled down, invoking dire predictions of blackouts in -30. She took an ad campaign national, calling it Tell the Feds.
They are disastrously uninformed and totally disconnected from reality.
Alberta had a rough weekend with temperatures in the -40s.
For much of Alberta, it was the coldest night in 50 years.
Caught in a brutal cold snap, pushing the province's grid to the brink.
As if to underscore her case, in early January, Alberta was plunged into record cold. An alert urged Albertans to reduce their electricity use over fears the gas-powered plants couldn't handle the load, and wind and solar power couldn't make up the difference. A perfect storm to blame the feds.
Our power grid relies on natural gas. I cannot build an electricity grid in this province off wind and solar when the sun goes down at 5 o'clock and just tell people to suck it up until the sun comes back up at 9 a.m. the next morning. And that's what he's expecting me to do.
That's another false affirmation from Premier Smith. What we've announced has no impacts right now whatsoever on electricity production in Alberta. Zero. And won't for another decade.
The truth that freezing weekend had as much to do with those natural gas plants. One was offline for maintenance, the other on reduced supply.
2 gas plants went down when it went really cold. That's the reality. She can try and mislead her population if she wants, but that won't change the fact that it's not because of renewable energy.
In fact, Alberta was leading the country in renewable development, until Smith stopped it with a moratorium on new projects, supposed to be lifted by spring.
70% of renewable energy investment in all of Canada happen in Alberta. Danielle Smith will never talk about this because it doesn't play to her base.
The Premier is putting her faith in another technology still being developed, carbon capture, which is supposed to pull CO2 out of emissions. So far, it hasn't captured enough carbon at the scale needed.
That's how we're going to reduce emissions, is by capturing the CO2 and making sure that we continue to go down a path that will get us to carbon neutrality by 2050.
Why should people be confident that that's going to happen? Look at the record so far. Emissions are growing year after year.
Look, it's a global environment, and that's why it's a global solution and a global problem. We're not going to curb the production of oil and natural gas. We're going to curb the production of emissions.
The 2 power brokers ultimately ended up at the same place, COP28, the world's climate conference in Dubai, with Steven Guilbeault as head of Canada's delegation and Danielle Smith right behind.
Quite frankly, if we weren't here to tell the Alberta story, no one would hear it.
Guilbeault was making news, choosing Dubai to launch a key plank of the climate plan, putting a cap on carbon emissions from oil and gas back in Canada. The first oil-producing country in the world to do it, he said.
What you do is you put a ceiling, a limit on the amount of pollution that a company, or in that case a sector, can emit.
Smith was watching, and she'd had enough, accusing Guilbeault of posturing on an international stage.
No emissions cap. He doesn't understand the Constitution. And the way our country works is that we both have sovereign areas of jurisdiction. And in Alberta, we have the right to develop our resources. As long as they continue to invade our jurisdiction, we're going to see them in court.
It is so decided.
As COP28 wound up in December, Smith blasted Guilbeault, calling him a national embarrassment, allied with radical activists, sabotaging the interests of Albertans, whom she said will not forget his continued treachery. Why is it so personal? She has called you treacherous, shameful, an eco-extremist. She wants to get you fired.
Well, I mean, I know she's personalizing it, but all of these things that I'm doing, whether it's zero-emission vehicles, whether it's clean electricity, whether it's capping the pollution of the oil and gas sector, are all elements that are supported by cabinet. It's not the Minister of the Environment running on a cabal by himself here. It is supported by the Government of Canada.
Still?
Well, absolutely.
But the Premier is not turning back, taking her fight directly to Ottawa and the Economic Club of Canada.
What's missing on Ottawa's side is an openness to the facts and a willingness to dismiss radical ideology in favor of reason.
She's lobbying federal cabinet ministers, but going around Guilbeault. The two have never formally met one-on-one. After all, she wants him gone.
I continue to have the support of the Prime Minister of Canada, of Cabinet, but I think that Premier Smith and Pierre Poilievre have decided to side with big oil companies that are making historic, record-level profits instead of siding with Canadians on this issue.
On the day she visited Ottawa, Premier Smith celebrated. Alberta produced more oil in 2023 than ever before, and 2024 is projected to be higher. When we come back,
the whole hillside's gone.
And this is my sister Tracy McKinley, and she passed away last year.
Those fed up with the politics won't wait.
We need to do things differently, or more Tracys will die.
Earth is under stress. Raging fires, unrelenting floods, and crippling drought. In only 30 years, the Arctic Ocean has lost 95% of its oldest ice. Yet it was 30 years ago, hundreds of politicians first met to tackle climate change, and they've been meeting ever since. But in the summer of 2021, the Pacific Northwest had never been hotter.
The whole hillside's gone.
Forest fires rampaged BC. By the end of June, a heat dome moved in.
Do I stay in my apartment and pass out? Or do I come out here and breathe the air and it be in the heat? It's like a catch-22. You don't really know what to do.
Temperatures climbed past 40 degrees.
It's never this bad. We've never experienced anything in the 40s.
The region wasn't prepared for it, and it would soon have tragic consequences.
Oh my God, look at that.
In Lytton, BC, the thermometer peaked at 49 degrees. The entire town destroyed by fire. At the time, Jane Armstrong was living in New Westminster in BC's Lower Mainland.
It got very hot. I happened to be on holiday at the time on one of the Gulf Islands, and it was pretty hot then. And we came home. This would have been maybe June 26th or 27th. We came home. It was really, really hot.
Jane remembers checking in on her older sister, Tracy McKinley, who lived alone and who had a bipolar disorder.
And her mental state of mind wasn't 100%, you know, but she was an adult living on her own, and for the most part, she coped. I kept phoning her and checking on her, like, how are you doing?
What was she telling you on the phone?
That she was fine.
But she wasn't fine. That night, Tracy died, alone in her apartment.
And the police came up and they just told me that she was found dead in her apartment. She had died in the heat.
That must have been so difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Obviously, if I knew she was going to die, I would have gone to get her and grabbed her and brought her to my home and said, hey, you could sleep in our basement. You know, but who knew? Like, no one knew this was coming. 600 people died. Like, where did they put all the bodies? I believe there was a place out in Abbotsford.
A BC coroner's report later warned there would be more frequent heat domes as a result of climate change, and confirmed 619 Canadians died in a single week. Jane had always been aware of her carbon footprint. She drives a hybrid, she has solar panels on her roof, but that summer, something changed. She became a protester too.
My name is Jane, and this is my sister Tracy McKinley, and she passed away last year. Sometimes I don't know what to do. This is my first public gathering. It's like, we need to do something, be proactive and stop.
I feel like I've been complacent for too long, and just felt like I want to get involved as a citizen and be heard and demand change from our governments.
Must have been hard, though, to relive the very personal and painful consequence of that heat dome.
Of course, yeah. On the one hand, you get used to telling this story. I can hold myself together, but other times it's really hard. Yeah.
What do you think she would think about you standing out there with her picture in a public space saying, do something?
I think she would love it.
And why do you think that the fossil fuel industry should be held accountable for this?
Well, they caused it. They caused a big chunk of it. There's a lot of money being made, and it's hard to, as a little person, to stand up against that.
Today, there's scientific consensus that burning fossil fuels is the primary cause of climate change and global warming. The battle is no longer around what causes climate change, but rather how to stop it. For 30 years, the United Nations has held annual meetings to address it. In Dubai last year, they finally mentioned the words fossil fuels.
So there was a much to do about the fact that this decision document from COP28 mentioned fossil fuels for the first time in the United Nations history, which is such a low bar. It's so insane, right?
Peter Kalmus is a climate scientist with NASA. He's speaking out, not on behalf of NASA, but as a concerned citizen. He says he refuses to attend any of those UN climate conferences. He works remotely from North Carolina. When he has to travel to NASA's lab in California, he takes the train to reduce his carbon footprint. He's stopped flying. Kalmus believes we're in a climate emergency.
You know there are still people who say, weather gets warmer, weather gets cooler over history.
Yeah, well, when you see a city in Hawaii burn up overnight, or when you see these crazy heat waves in the Pacific Northwest that we've never experienced in human history, when you see flooding all around North America and China, these crazy wildfires in Greece and Spain, coral reefs dying around the world, and you write scientific papers, you do your scientific work, and it's not helping. So yeah, because of that, I started to turn to civil disobedience. And I guess that was probably a really major turning point when I risked arrest for the first time in April of 2022.
We are doing civil disobedience at JP Morgan Chase Bank, which out of all the banks in the world, the one that has done the most to fund fossil fuel projects. So I'm here because scientists are not being listened to. I'm willing to take a risk for this gorgeous planet, for my sons. And we've been trying to warn you guys for so many decades that we're heading towards a catastrophe.
You risked a lot.
Yeah.
You're a scientist, you have a job at NASA, you have a family, and you chained yourself to a bank.
Yeah, and when I did that, I thought there was an extremely good chance that I would be fired. I just felt like I was being ignored as a scientist, and sitting there watching the planet basically get hotter and hotter.
You know that other people say that that just makes you a irresponsible activist, and they dismiss those things.
Well, I think the people who dismiss climate civil disobedience, I think they're in denial.
In a statement, JP Morgan said it provides financing across the energy sector, including a target of $1 trillion for climate action over the next 6 years. When we come back, frustrations boil over.
Do you accept violence in this fight? Do you accept blowing up pipelines?
The climate change movement is evolving, growing, well-funded, and focused not only on protests, but strategy. Sensing its power, the battle tactics are changing, some of them deeply polarizing. Like when these activists threw tomato soup on the glass covering a Van Gogh painting in London. It went viral.
Millions of people are dying in monsoons, wildfires, and severe drought.
3 weeks later, it was liquefied potatoes on a Monet in Potsdam.
Wir sind in einer Klimakatastrophe. Braucht es Kartoffelbrei auf einem Gemälde, damit ihr zuhört?
Canada's Emily Carr in Vancouver wasn't spared either. Maple syrup splashed on the protective glass to protest pipeline expansion. The group Tire Extinguishers has mobilized across the UK, Australia, and Canada to deflate the tires of SUVs.
Why is it okay for business leaders and politicians to displace Indigenous people and raise entire forests in order to drill oil or harvest lumber? And that's not considered violence, but slashing tires is.
They will defame us and claim this was violence.
A book, How to Blow Up a Pipeline, was made into a movie. Peter Kalmus is a climate scientist who once chained himself to a bank.
Is there an acceptable limit on civil disobedience before you alienate the people you're trying to get attention from?
I mean, I remember the activists who threw tomato soup, and they were excoriated by what I refer to as the moderate part of the climate movement, the climate moderates.
Do you accept violence in this fight?
I am
Do you accept
deeply...
blowing up pipelines? There's a whole book about that.
Yeah. So when you weigh billions of lives against infrastructure, which is threatening and right now even actively killing many lives, and you can disrupt that deadly infrastructure in a way that doesn't even injure an actual human, I do think that's something that the movement has to start thinking very seriously about.
Violence.
Well, I would call it nonviolent actions against infrastructure that's endangering the lives of billions of people.
But it might be those working within the law getting the biggest headlines now, in the form of lawsuits against the fossil fuel industry.
For decades and decades, the oil industry has been playing each and every one of us in this room for fools.
California, the 5th largest economy in the world, is suing 5 big oil companies, including ExxonMobil and Chevron, claiming they knew their emissions were harmful.
Their deceit and denial going back decades has created the conditions that persist here today.
The oil companies reject the lawsuit. Chevron saying climate change is global, calling for a policy response, not piecemeal litigation benefiting attorneys and politicians.
The resolution is adopted.
In Oregon, a county lawsuit blames the fossil fuel industry for those heat dome deaths.
With this action, we seek to hold these fossil fuel companies accountable for the damages that have arisen from one of the most deadly and destructive human-made weather disasters in American history.
You've taken millions of dollars.
And youth are emboldened in this U.S. election year.
Go home to mommy. Your mommy's waiting. Go home to mommy. Thank you.
In Canada, young citizens seem to be leading the charge, in public and in court. Suing the federal government for breaching its climate obligations, and taking on Ontario over its climate plan.
We have not come here to beg politicians for change. We have come here to show them that change is coming.
Sophia Mather was 12 years old when she and a group of kids launched that lawsuit, accusing the government of weakening its climate targets, risking people's health and lives.
Open up those eyes a little bit more for me.
Sophia is 4 years older now, so is that lawsuit.
Beautiful. Chin down a bit.
Well, it's been a phrase that I've been saying, but when all else fails, sue. We felt like when activism and going out and protesting, it kind of feels like we're talking to politicians and they can choose not to listen.
Today's task, a publicity shoot, part of a campaign to capture attention and grow funding. Last year, a judge agreed with parts of their argument. Climate change will have a disproportionate impact on youth and Indigenous people, but dismissed the case.
What chance do you think, or why do you think it could have success at the appeal stage?
Regardless of if it has like a final win, there's a lot of people that are paying attention to this and realizing that their government is not paying attention to their future.
Today is their hearing in Ontario's Court of Appeal.
We're walking to court. I'm like nervous and excited at the same time.
I feel like I'll just keep going. Yeah, as long as it takes.
Madison Dyke is focused on the end game.
I think I feel really emotional. Yeah, I feel emotional that I need to be in this position, and I really also hope that the next generation doesn't have to stand on these courts fighting for their future.
Their case may fail on appeal, but across North America, dozens of climate lawsuits are ongoing against governments and corporations.
Well, so here in Victoria, I've been to 3 demonstrations, walking around with my Tracy and I and the placard sign.
And in British Columbia, one woman won't stop either.
Do you think in your lifetime it'll make a difference?
I hope so. Yeah, I think so.
Jane Armstrong is living in Victoria now, carrying on with a campaign in honor of her sister who died in that heat dome.
21, and obviously we miss her. But then the message I put on the back when I was making this is like, what is the message? Well, the message is like fossil fuel dependency plus denial plus delay equals disasters and deaths. At least that's what came out of my head when I was making this poster. I don't know, I kind of like to bring her out into public and say this was my sister and she died and it mattered and we need to do things differently or more Tracys will die.
Meanwhile, 2023 was declared officially the hottest year on record. Scientists say 2024 is tracking to be the same or hotter.